Hey, so another issue I've been tracking is the funding for science in free market Western democracies. And the data suggests that we've been seeing cuts across the board. Climate change, in particular, or climate science, has been a the kind of science that's been greatly kind of impacted with the cuts. But it's a trend that's happening across the board, and it's happening for most of the sciences. And anyone who is concerned about the development of sciences and all the progress, which is literally all the progress that we see around ourselves, has been powered by some scientific breakthrough or technological innovation. I think anyone who's concerned about these things, about the way we're heading as a society, about the future of democracy and the innovations that the democratic system powers as a construct, directly and indirectly, with innovation driving the whole thing. I think these are the conversations we need to have in order to be able to define these problems. So we're just objective in terms of the kind of conversations that need to happen. So what I did was I spent a little bit of time looking into this space, and what I've done is I've taken a look at it from the point of view of what's happening in the various countries across the Western Hemisphere or Western civilization, which is largely, again, the free market kind of functioning democracies. And I've just kind of briefly looked into what's happening there from the perspective of policy making, more specifically budget cuts for publicly funded science and some of the other trends that are happening. So I'll kind of go through each one of these countries, and I'll just kind of rest my case, and I'll kind of wrap it up with the scientific rankings, and maybe I'll mention it in the middle and how the scientific rankings are changing. And um, I'll just say it, non-democratic, um, not exactly free market economies are the kind of institutions that are taking the lead in a lot of different areas, most of which, I mean, scientific research and technological innovation. Um, in terms of the research papers that are submitted any given year, data suggests that non-democratic institutions may end up leading this space uh, in a in a span of as low as 5 to 8 years. And when that happens, it changes everything. I mean, you can make a case. Some people make a case that things change with the flow of wealth. I say that is true, but I think things change even faster with technological and scientific dominance, or when you kind of take over in that sphere, because you can scale so much more quickly with technology, and with it just takes one scientific breakthrough for everything to change. So I mean, there's a lot of underlying things, and if it's a systems issue and a design issue, then we've got to talk about a lot of things. We've got to talk about primary education, and converting more research into economies of scale, or viable industries at the very least. We've got to talk about being sincere and being sincere about things like opening up frontiers, such as the frontier of space. And we've got to talk about monopolies that have overstayed their existence. We've got to talk about a lot of things. We've got to talk about, this is a big issue, actually. I think this is one of the biggest issues for North America. All of these are big issues on their own right. But kids in the minorities are not taking algebra, which is an absolute must if they are to go into college and university level programs for STEM or STEAM, as it is referred to as now. I mean, these and a lot more are the basic pillars that sustain civilization, and we can't just pay lip service to these things. But most of which, it all starts with, where do we allocate our resources and where do we allocate our money? And when it comes to that, publicly funded science, from the perspective of history, has been the engine that has driven all progress in the world for the past 115 years at the very least. So we can kind of go back to a Enlightenment or pre-Enlightenment era, and or you can go all the way back to Galileo. Depends on how you want to look at it, and the advent of modern science. And with Britain being an economic powerhouse in the well, pretty much um, from the 18th century and the 19th century, and then the United States had the kind of base of that model as well. I mean, in the United States, so if you talk about the present day context, which is really what I want to focus on. By the way, the Wikipedia page for the history of science, and in particular the history of science for Britain and also for the United States, and the history of science in general. These are all amazing repositories, and I've kind of looked into all of those. I have notes related to that if anyone is interested. But I mean, the Wikipedia pages are great. You just kind of go there and you get everything. But yeah, again, coming back to a modern day context. So the United States actually became a scientific and technological powerhouse because the building blocks were there, and they really started focusing on it in a systematic manner throughout the 20th century. So from 1901 till 1930s, there was a lot of effort that was gone into systemizing research in science, and they attracted scientists from all over the world, most notably Britain, Germany, rest of Western Europe, and some scientists from Canada. Then you had the Manhattan Project and things like Vannevar Bush, to also people or individuals like Frederick Terman, who eventually turned the Defense Valley into Silicon Valley, and a lot of other people in the middle. And I mean, a lot of scientists scientists coming from Europe, and helped kickstart the whole space industry, or started in the United States, to a lot of other scientists across the board who were instrumental in taking the United States to the next level and making it an scientific and technological powerhouse. And the result is that we've seen innovation in a lot of different areas, from kind of computing and all the innovations that have been had with the microchip. I mean, just think about that for a second. How many innovations and industries, how many trillions of dollars of industries are, my mom is calling me, how many trillions of dollars of industry are driven by the microchip, with the computing, the networks, and the sensors, and how they all find their base in the microchip. So from that alone, then you got space, and you got defense systems of all sorts, aerospace, life sciences, health. I mean, across the board, we've seen innovation, but it all traces its origin back to the developments that were had in the earlier 20th century, again, from 1901 to 1930s and subsequent decades as well. So even today, a lot of innovation that we work on finds its base underpinnings on breakthroughs that were happened in the past. And again, amongst the other things that I mentioned and more, the imperative to be able to support and sustain publicly funded science and policies that are geared towards ensuring that happens is an absolute must. Recently, a phenomena has been kind of floated, and some really important people and intelligent people in society are advocating the need for that. But I don't think we should work on the privatization of science at the expense of getting rid of publicly funded science. If they run in parallel, which is how it has happened in the past, I have no problems with that. But I think the imperative for publicly funded science is an absolute must. Now, if barring some massive kind of change happens to society where we have to rethink the notion of work and like distribution of wages, I don't know, like we have a breakthrough in machine cognition or machine-based consciousness, and it impacts work, and you have to rethink taxes and what we do to fund all these things, specifically science, then I say, okay, we need a new model. But we're not there yet. That's not happening. So the imperative for funding publicly funded science is absolutely there. Um, and that's really what my conversation or this video is about. So I said I'm going to take a look at some research that I did and some notes I shared. So my research suggests that, again, focusing on the evolution of this phenomena, if you want to call it that, from the perspective of functioning democracies in the Western world, which is pretty much all the countries in the Western world. I mostly focused on English-speaking countries because Europe is largely German-centric, and Germany is doing all the right things based on what I can see. They're not cutting science funding. They're making education free across the board, including higher education, research, PhD level programs, and making it free for everyone, including immigrants who are very new to the country. So these are the kind of policies that you need to adopt. And with that and some of the other projects that Germany is doing, like Desert Tech, to, again, Germany is doing all the right things. Again, from a policy and from the perspective of how a government should be functioning. So I'm going to start, that being said, I'm going to start with the United States. And I think when things started changing for the United States, it's kind of difficult to pinpoint when exactly. Some people suggest that things started changing in the 50s. And some people suggest that we've just been kind of, as a continent and as a civilization, we've been just kind of benefiting from the policies that were instituted at the time, and we've just been kind of using the technological and scientific innovations that could be had during that time, and we're just kind of capitalizing upon that and building on top of that, and which is all true. But at the same time, I think something fundamentally and radically started changing within the United States within the past 15 to 20 years. And it's almost as if there is like an attack on publicly funded science. And it's almost as if the population is critical of any new scientific development, specifically when it comes to scientific development in the realm of life sciences or health sciences. What is happening, I think, also is because of a breakdown of the educational system, which is, I think, contributing to a lot of these problems as well. So the funding cuts is a problem, but the policy being skewed because of, I don't know, for whatever reason, because the public is not in favor of it, or, we're mixing policy making with something else, or that the right kind of education and underlying base pillars are not there. These are all issues that we need to look into. Lack of talent is one. How do you do that when the reverse brain drain is happening, and where all these other nations are competing for talent as you are? You've got to make the platform in such a way that you attract the best and the brightest, and which is largely what the United States did as an institution. But there's no guarantee that that's going to happen in the future, because the focus, again, is just not there. So again, like I said, the phenomena started 15 to 20 years ago. My sense is, I think it started way back in the 50s. I think all of these issues that I've mentioned are true in their, all of these issues are true in its entirety. And it's important to look at each one of these developments, if you want to call it that, and reverse the trend and fix these underlying problems. But it started getting really bad 20 years ago, where there were direct attacks. It started with stem cell, an area that the United States and Britain pioneered, and then the policy making under the George W. Bush regime or government was just not there, or the policy making was non-existent. That's what the data suggests. And because of those reasons and a lack of focus, the research ended up flowing to other parts of the world. And in the words of a professor at University of California at San Francisco, Susan Fisher. Science is like a stream of water because it finds its way, and now it has found its way outside the United States. And she's referring to stem cell related research that was ignored during that time and how it kind of went to other areas. So now data suggests that this, again, phenomena is not just specific to stem cell research. Reports indicate that the United States is losing its dominance in other areas of science as well. And in spite of such reports, not much has been done to reverse this trend. All those issues that I've explained in the past, there doesn't seem to be a clear, cohesive policy when it comes to reversing these trends and basically switching the trend, which is basically the same thing. But there doesn't seem to be any policy. There's no literature on the existence of such policy on government websites. The focus is not there. Again, to make the issues worse, massive budget cuts have been witnessed when it comes to publicly funded science. Last year was particularly bad, where the science funding saw a lot of cuts across the board. So if you look at data and you look at the amount of budget that is allocated in order to be able to sustain civilization from the context of the United States as an institution. So you say you have this much allocated for everything. So from defense to infrastructure to healthcare to everything, everything that you can conceive of the government spends money on. So you have the budget that looks this big, right? Or that big. The amount of money you spend for science is like literally this much. It's a fraction of the total budgetary spend. And on top of that, in spite of that, the United States is still cutting budgets in that fraction. It's only a couple of $1 billion. And I got to look at the numbers again, but it's compared to trillions of dollars, the billions spent on science is nothing, and still it's receiving cuts. So again, privatization of science is not important. It's not the answer. There is a need, an imperative for publicly funded science. You never know which kind of breakthrough you're going to require at what time, and what kind of industries will eventually come out of something that would find its origin in publicly funded science. So, these are reports from mid-2000, and they warranted action, and the Bush government didn't do anything. I don't want to turn this into a political discussion, but I think the Obama government had a lot of there was a lot for them to fix. The economy was a big issue. I think he did pretty good at that. The Obama government has done pretty good at that. There was just a lot of issues. And again, I don't want to turn this into a political conversation, but I think science is one of the areas that kind of got overlooked. And the good thing about the United States as an institution, irrespective of the Republican or the Democrats, is once the issue is kind of addressed or is brought up in the collective cognition or consciousness, it gets addressed relatively quickly. But when it comes to the issue that is being discussed right now or proposed right now, it's a pretty complex issue. It requires surgery, if you want to call it, on multiple levels, most of which require re-augmentation and radically changing how systems work without disrupting the output. Or eventually the goal is to get the maximum and best output, but a lot of systems have to be changed. That's the long and the short of it. So, there's also the issue of the public perception, like the whole thing, the whole reason why, kind of going back to the origins, stem cell got impacted, stem cell research got impacted was because the policy making was hijacked because of public perception. The issue was not addressed properly. Democracy was hijacked, whatever you want to call it, or people did not understand the policies or the science, and ethical issues got all muddled up because of XYZ. And it kind of reminds me of this book I read. It's called Demon Haunted World: Science as a Candle in the Dark, which was written by Carl Sagan in 1995, where Carl Sagan talks about a bunch of things in that book, but it's basically a warning against pseudoscience, and also being mindful and vigilant of the fact that we do not turn into a society that is one of the quotes in the book is Carl Sagan is kind of saying that we live in a society that where literally everything is governed by or is revolves around or is sorry we live in a society where everything is inherently dependent upon science and technology, but where very few people actually understand how science and technology work. So that's very true of the kind of society that exists today. We may have people in the right kind of places in order to be able to sustain civilization, but I think innovation is slowing down. We're not innovating on a pace again that we were innovating in. At least data suggests so in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. I mean, these guys created computing systems and networks and rocket ships and transportation systems of all sorts, and like defense systems and radar systems, and like, I mean, what have we done? Like, what have we done in the past 20, 30 years? It's things seem to be changing, but like, relatively speaking, I think there was more innovation happening in the world of atoms. And I think we've innovated a lot in the world of bits. And maybe that cycle was required in order to be kind of like, I'm not going to get into the whole conversation about innovation itself, but it just seems to me like we need more science and more technology and more innovation today. And we are not focusing on it for some of the reasons that I've shared. So yeah, I can kind of keep going on when it comes to the imperative for United States as an institution to focus more on publicly funded science. But I think I should move on because the video is at the 22-minute mark. So for Canada, we are making the grave mistake of, or have made the grave mistake of, tying science with a profit motive, especially during the past 8 years. We had a conservative government here, and the public perception is kind of comes across as anti-science. It definitely comes across as very anti-climate science, and just the fact that we our government made the grave mistake of tying specific sciences and playing favorites and tying it to a profit motive is just bad. That's not why you do science. Again, you do science just so you don't play favorites, and you do all sorts of science, and you do science because again you want to understand how nature works, how the universe works, what's her place in the cosmos, understand more about yourself, about your body, about your mind, about your consciousness, and about an invariable number of things like human origins to how everything within each one of these systems functions, from the oceans to the planets to you name it, right? And that's science. In science, you use data and reason in order to be able to infer upon or deduce or test your hypotheses, and if your observations match your hypotheses, then it's true, and if it's not, then it's not. And you're just gonna say it doesn't work, and you kind of move on to other things. But you don't make shit up, and you don't play favorites. That's not science. That's something else. I don't even know what that is. So that's largely what's going on in Canada. It's a problem, and we need to talk about it. And there's a blog post, I'm going to put this in the comment section, which kind of chronicles, at least from the perspective of how climate science is being silenced in Canada. And we need to have a conversation about these things, because climate change is going to impact a shit ton of things. In UK, their version of the Federal Reserve, which is known as the Treasury, they recently asked government departments across the board to model 25 to 40% cuts. And this is a news item that emerged in August this year. So remains to be seen what the impact of these cuts will be. I've already spoken about Germany and Europe that is largely German centric. Um, I think Germany is making the right policies. However, I should say about Europe, um, if you look at the scientific rankings, then in 1996, 20 out of the 40 top countries in the listing were of European origin. In 2014, that number dropped to 18. So it's not a drastic change, so to speak, but change is expediting across the board. So countries that were sitting on, like, I don't know, number 27 or 32 are kind of moving up. So, and some of these countries in Europe that may be hit with the austerity measures, I don't know what kind of science funding cuts are going to go in place and how it's going to impact scientific progress. But I think overall Europe's going to do fine. I think they're focusing on the big things and doing a really good job at that. My sense is that Europe's policies are far kind of, what's the word? They kind of look like, they have a long-term vision, and they're pragmatic and very reasonable in their approach. And I kind of like German approach and policies towards sustaining civilization. I've got a little bit of I looked briefly into what Australia is doing, and there's some budget cuts for science. New Zealand is okay. So I said, I was going to come back and talk about the rankings, scientific rankings. So, we're seeing these budget cuts for science in Western democracies, but other countries are increasing their science budget. So, for example, China, and I'm going to plug this graph or this link of how China has increased its scientific budget. And like I said, during the past 18 years, China's climbed from a number 9 spot in terms of the global scientific rankings in 1996 to number 2 last year. And they are, by some estimates, they will overtake the United States as the top science producer by 2020. It's not 8 years, sorry, I was wrong. It's only, do the math, 4 years, 5 years down the road. So things are going to change. They're not going to change past 2020. They're probably changing right now. I mean, look at some of these bigger issues by, like cybersecurity, and there's going to be other kinds of security in the future. And it's a big unknown what's going to happen. But, so again, I don't want to turn this into a political kind of discussion of Republicans versus Democrats, or conservative versus liberal, or China versus United States. I started the conversation with the future of scientific and technological progress, scientific research and technological progress in free and functioning democracies. Again, my kind of sense is, my belief is, that you need 3 things in a kind of in the system in terms of the triangle, which are scientific and technological progress, democracy as the base, which powers everything, and you need free market economies. So all of these things are important in their own right in order to be able to power in order to be able to power humanistic, secular kind of values through society. And the absence of any one of these things entails that you'll probably have one or the other. You could have like a society where there is resource abundance and there's prosperity for all, but you're not going to have freedoms and liberties, right? Or it's going to seem like the notion of freedom and liberties. I don't know what it's going to be. And I can share the details as to why I say the things I say that. Or you could have a society where, on the other hand, so what do you want to take out? So do you want to take out the prosperity? Do you want to take out the science? Do you want to take out the democracy? I mean, there's going to be repercussions no matter which one of these entities you take out, and I don't. We should not be subjugated, if that's the word, into making decisions where we have to sacrifice one thing for another. So we should not be sacrificing, in the words of the forefathers of I think Benjamin Franklin. Was it Ben Franklin who said this? You should not have to trade your freedoms for or liberties for security, and you should not have to trade some kinds of science so that I don't know, you can move to a form of system or governance which makes it more integrative on a global scale, because you can do, I don't know, whatever, right? The reason why I say these things is because, again, science allows you to continually learn more about our position, and not just about ourselves, about our place in the universe, about our sense of reality. And we use these understandings in order to be able to continually redefine our society, our civilization, our systems, our constructs, and ourselves. Like, understanding, like, the roots of consciousness are still a mystery to some of the best scientists in the world. But one single small breakthrough, we don't have to replicate consciousness in its entirety in order to be able to benefit immensely from such a development. Just like we didn't have to redevelop flight, as in how a bird functions with all its different and intricate pieces. We just had to get one insight of how a wing leverages thrusts or float in the air, and that has driven all sorts of transportation systems when it comes to flight for the past couple of decades. I don't know how old flight is. The similarly thing with consciousness, right? We don't have to replicate consciousness in all of its diverse forms. We just need one breakthrough in order to be able to make machines conscious, and that's going to power a lot of different realities. And I think we're on path to be able to do that. So I guess what I'm really saying here is that there's no need, no imperative in order to be able to sacrifice anything from the perspective of free, functioning, fair democracies, human rights, rights of man in a gender-neutral context. Continued scientific innovation is an absolute must. We don't need to sacrifice any one of these things in a non-transparent way, in a way which makes no sense. Like, why would free, functioning democracies do such things? And if the democracies are doing such things, then the populace and the mass, the people have to ask the government why are they doing the things they're doing, because that's how democracies function. The government is accountable to the people, and when that happens, you have liberties. When it doesn't happen, you don't have liberties, and when you don't have liberties, I don't think you have a democracy. I don't know what you have, but then we have to redefine the problem. So yeah, that's really my my concerns when it comes to some of these issues. I think overall these are design problems. Just taking a look at my notes, making sure I didn't forget anything. I think overall these are design problems. These are complex systems problems. So the ability, as there always is, and like I say, the imperative is to be able to define the problems right the first time and redefine the problem when new information arises, to do it objectively using data and science and reason. And the solution to complex problems, systems problems, requires systems thinking, requires creativity, and the ability to be able to redefine the problem in a way that gives you a new insight, depending on which angle you look at it from. But this looks like a a case of lack of focus to me. That I don't know. Is sometimes I think it happens sometimes where we get so caught up in the complexity that I think we forget about the basics. And we've all made this mistake as individuals. And since systems are made out of humans, um, it happens. People we just forget about basic things. So an example I've looked at in the past is um, the shift to a FIRE economy, which is finance, insurance, and real estate. So up until a certain amount of time, when it comes to the history of the United States, at the very least, the manufacturing index was pretty high. And throughout the 40s or the 50s, it's on my blog at adilkhan.ca. So somebody's Econo Monitor, which is a think tank led by Nouriel Roubini, who's a leading economist. They kind of look at the FIRE index, which is what I just explained, versus, the FIRE index here, which is the finance, insurance, and real estate. And this is the manufacturing index. It's pretty high in the 40s and the 50s. But throughout the decades, the two graphs kind of look like this, where the manufacturing index just kind of plummets to really low levels in the 90s and the early 2000s. And the FIRE index is kind of going like this up until 2008, and there's a hit because of the whole financial bubble and housing bubble and whatnot. What does that say? Well, I think what that says is that I think the move towards a service sector economy is an imperative. It has been for the past couple of decades, and probably will be for at least the next 2 or 3 decades. But I think you cannot just completely ignore the manufacturing sector as well. And I think because of this phenomena, when we talk about things like, not innovating as much in the world of atoms, then I think a lot of it can trace itself back to that one phenomena where the focus just wasn't there. And the focus wasn't there because, can come up with any number of reasons, because it's not cost efficient to be able to produce in North America, or so. I mean, you've got to, like, this is the thing, right? If profit is the only mechanism by which we monitor or measure progress, then what does that say about society? What does that say about innovation and supporting science and innovation and opening up frontiers and redefining our sense of reality? It's a lot of questions tied in with what I'm trying to present here, and I think all of these questions are important in their own right, because you cannot have innovation and you cannot have economies of scale. You cannot have progress. I don't think you can have you cannot champion humanistic values when you haven't created industries that have the means, capability, and capacity in order to be able to provide for the people. Because if you don't do that, when what happens is, and if you have the alternative, you're like, okay, well, we're not a democracy and we're okay with that. So I'm not speaking on behalf of one segment of the population or another or a subset. I'm just saying it's, somewhere, somehow that's an unwritten assumption or a clause or mindset that we develop. It's not a growth mindset, first of all. And what happens is, though, if we don't talk about these things, then they never come out, and you're never able to define the problem, let alone even come up with solutions to that. The problem then, what happens is, it gets exacerbated. You have, like, I think this is happening right now. I'm not making this up. We have the issue of class war. We have it's a big issue, like, what's happening in some of the inner city kind of issues. Again, kids in the minority not taking algebra. All these issues are interconnected. I can kind of go on, but at the base of it, it's all tied to the fact that we are not focusing on the basics, and we need to go back to the basics. We need to invest in publicly funded science. We need to invest in education. We need to invest in infrastructure. But that's a larger conversation about the kind of issues that, at least North America confronts or is faced with. I just want to keep this very short and specific to publicly funded science and why it is absolutely necessary that we do that and we talk about that. And if there are reasons as to why that's not happening, then I would like to know. I mean, what does this mean by the privatization of science? How can we do that? Like, where are we going to get hundreds of billions of dollars worth of money to be able to fund publicly funded science? It'd be really ideal if the two systems, if they were publicly funded and privatization of science, if they were working in parallel. Like I said, maybe equity crowdfunding could help our the privatization of science in the future. But up until we get to that model, we cannot kind of go through a period of, I don't know, 5 to 10 years to figure this out, like has happened in the past. And then we found out, oh, we're number 5 in the world in terms of technological and scientific dominance. So yeah, these I present my case, and if somebody actually watched this for the entire 41 minutes, and you, I mean, live in a functioning free market economy with democracy as its base, and you are concerned about the future of science, or you're just concerned about the future of science and democracy in general and how they're tied to each other in some respects. I kind of go with this definition of wealth. I mean, sorry. First of all, I meant to say, if you saw all of this and you fit in this category or are concerned about science and scientific funding or lack of it at the very least, then let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear from somebody. I'd just like to close on the notes that, I kind of read this somewhere. It makes a lot of sense. I've been kind of reevaluating my life too for the past couple of years. And what does it mean by wealth? And I used to be very kind of active in the markets. I don't claim to know a lot. I'm just a novice or noob, if you want to call it that. But kind of lost my interest in markets, and I'm kind of, I guess, in some respects, trying to get back into it, but not with the same intensity. Not even monitoring my portfolio on a daily or weekly basis. There's not much of it left, anyways. But anyways, so because if you don't invest, I mean, if you don't focus on it, it goes away. Same thing with science, right? Same thing with civilization. If you don't focus on the areas that are necessary or for growth, they just kind of wither away. But that being said, my definition of wealth today is that it helps improves human lives. And I don't think profit should be the only mechanism by which we equate everything. So I truly believe in democracy, and I believe in capitalism and the combination of two in terms of the free market economies in order to help power economies of scale and human progress and innovation and scientific breakthroughs. Because that combination by itself is what guarantees the possibility that we're going to be able to attract talent from all over the world and redirect it in areas where we would like to see the growth happening or incentivizing growth, so to speak. I don't think there is another system or a combination of which that can allow us to do or get those kind of outputs. So the thing though is, I think somewhere along the line I'm not sure. I think somewhere along the lines we just started innovating too much in areas where the majority were maybe, I don't know, I haven't had a lot of time to think about this particular issue, but that's why I don't want to talk about economics right now. But I just kind of leave it at the fact that the real definition of wealth is to help improve human lives. And the only thing that has allowed us to do that in the past is investing in newer kinds of sciences and technologies so that the many innovations that could be had could be continually recreated and made accessible to the people in newer ways so that they could have more information, so that they could make more informed choices, so that they could learn more, do more, and understand their purpose or, well, their place, sorry, not the purpose, place in the universe and on terrestrial Earth. And that's, technology is an enabler, it's a tool, but the thing that drives it is scientific research and innovation. And when we, as a society and as a civilization, stop focusing on that, it puts the brakes on a lot of things in the future, in the near future, in the far out future, and in the future a couple of decades from now. And like with the risks coming our way with like climate change and the impact that's going to have on the food and water cycles, I mean, with like rising extremism in another part of the world, um, there's a lot of risks. I mean, also the nature of work, how it's going to change with machine learning, mobile robotics. I mean, the imperative is to re-architect society so that we have more of science and technology and not less of it. Um, because, and this is where I kind of sent out a tweet about this last night. There's a guy, his name is, I should remember because I sent out a tweet last night. Something West. I'm going to put the tweet in my comments. But basically, he's kind of drawn a graph of the things that are required for a company or a culture if they are to sustain themselves. And basically, what happens is you have technological progress, and it kind of plateaus out, and then if it doesn't innovate on a scale that is exponential, or you don't have a lot of rapid innovations happening in a short amount of time, then the civilization collapses. And the only way a civilization has kept itself going throughout the times, if it makes a pattern like this, which kind of looks like a like a stair, like a bunch of stairs. So basically, you've got like a lot of innovations happening in a short succession, and then plateaus out, and then there's no imperative but to keep on innovating. And there's comes a time where you have to innovate on a better, faster level on a scale. And I think this is that time at the juncture of our civilization, our collective human civilization, where we need to come up with these breakthroughs. We need to invest in sciences. We need to invest in newer kind of technologies, and we need to be patient when it comes to the development of these sciences and technologies, because there's no other way. You cannot run civilization on anything else. You cannot run it on conjecture, on rhetoric, or on magic, or on pills. You have to have science and technology. And if we don't do that, then we run the risk of falling back to some medieval times where we believe in some mysticism, or just kind of give into it's like this depressive state where you kind of just get comfortable with the demise or the decline, and just like it's despair, and it's probably like a lot of bad news, because you won't be able to sustain a population of 9 billion people. So it means more of the status quo in terms of wars and suffering and slicing and dicing the pie, I don't know, 9 billion different ways. You just can't do it, man. And so I think those are like the kind of thoughts at the back of my mind too, which makes me really sincerely want to make this case for the promotion of sciences and technological advancement. And I'm not a scientist by trade, but I love science, and I've always loved science ever since I was a kid. All sorts of science, most of which, I love space sciences, and I love archaeology and the origins of humans, and biology has been my favorite. I love plants and botany, and I love all sorts of sciences, but these are some of my favorite. And cognitive sciences, which has been a fascination of mine for the past couple of years. Started with an interest in psychology and human behavior. Um, but there's so many other kinds of sciences, and they are all equally exciting, from material science to, you know, you name it. There's so many different kinds of sciences, and that's the kind of things we need to invest in. And we need to also think of ways of how we can restructure systems so we can have more of science. We can have more kids getting interested in science and more kids doing science. And we need to think about making education free, like Germany did, because these are the kind of things, and we need to make science cool. Science is cool. We need to popularize that notion. We need to have more of cosmos. Government's got to step in and go up to Neil deGrasse Tyson and the other guy, Seth MacFarlane, who's, I think, is pivotal when it comes to kickstarting the whole Cosmos series, and go up to them and say, hey, how can we help? Like, if you guys need government funding, this is really cool, right? And Hollywood's got to work with, I don't know, DoD or DARPA, and um, who else supports science? Various universities, and seeing what kind of shows and movies and programs and games, what kind of themes do we want to incorporate in the media in order to be able to um, just kind of promote more science and more concepts that kids are going to grow up with. And we got to be intelligent about that. I mean, because if you look at like from my generation, like, and having worked in the industry, I've met so many people who were like literally all comp sci graduates. Like, it's a given. Like 99% were inspired by Star Wars, or they were Trekkies. So I mean, that says a lot, right? Media has an influence, and it has a impact. There is a psychological impact, and it's a good kind of psychology, where we're driving the kind of concepts we need kids to kind of grow up with, because we know it will help with the maturation of industries and entire sciences. And that's my case. Like, it's not just the funding and re-architecting the systems and having these conversations are absolutely important, but we need to make changes in a lot of different areas, and all of these issues are equally right in their own respects, collectively and individually. And it's not just the government or the universities or the privatization of science or the media or the military or the intelligence, or who else? Society. Everyone has to kind of work together in order to be able to promote these values. Because I think, I suspect, I think with everything happening in the world, we just forget how important science and technology are, and we just take it for granted, and we are like, oh yeah, those guys are at Google are doing all the cool stuff. That's so awesome. Or I don't know, Facebook is doing some really cool stuff with virtual, which they are. There's no doubt they aren't, or they're making self-driving cars, or I don't know, flying blimps, which are gonna deliver internet from the space. Which again they will, but I think this phenomenon needs to grow kind of mainstream, and I think it is. But we need to talk about it more, and we need to create more institutions that make sure that this momentum continues. We need more maker spaces and more maker fair kind of events, and more technology coming into the libraries, and libraries turning into maker spaces or part of it. And we need to upgrade our libraries and make information more digitally accessible, like India is doing with its linking of all the tens of thousands of libraries in India are going to be interlinked, and everyone's going to have a tablet, which is going to be like $1 in terms of the cost it takes to produce that tablet, or $5 at that. or $20 in that, which is nothing. Um, so I mean, these and many more ideas are what we need, but at the base of it, it's a systems issue, and I've tried to share some of these systems issue. I think the single most important issue is policy and funding, particularly publicly funded science should not take a hit no matter what happens, because you need it at all times. You especially need it right now with everything happening in the world. You need more of science, not less of it. So I can't conceivably imagine the governments going in and saying we're going to cut science budget, which is already a fraction of the total spend. It's less than 1%. So why are we cutting it? Makes no sense to me. But we also need to work on all the other issues that I have taken a time to document. And if somebody actually watched the whole thing at this point, I feel like I'm saying it again because I probably am. And I thank you for your time, and I'd love to hear back from you. Thanks.